Okay, you're live.
Good evening. This is a work session of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Sleepy Hollow. We are meeting obviously via teleconference pursuant to an emergency order that the governor issued last year in March, I believe. Pursuant to that, I'm going to do a roll call to make sure that we have a quorum so that we can conduct business this evening. And I'll begin with Deputy Mayor Scaglione.
Here.
Trustee Andres.
Here.
Trustee Gebler.
Here.
Trustee Gonzalez.
Here.
Trustee Rodriguez.
Here.
And Trustee Spiro.
Here.
And we have a quorum. Great. Our agenda tonight has a couple of interesting discussion items, or at least I think so. We'll see how it turns out. First one, just wanted to kick it off. We're in a process that, from my perspective, we've been in for about 3 years now as a village. And I'm going back to when we started the comprehensive plan, updating our comprehensive plan here in Sleepy Hollow. And we spent a lot of really productive time working on a plan that we thought would be appropriate for the village and one that we fully intend to implement the recommendations in that plan. One of them was looking at our downtown and ways that we could encourage investment, especially in vacant properties or underutilized properties in our downtown. And we just recently started an effort to look at zoning downtown as being one of the chief ways we could encourage investment. And how we could tweak or change or substantially change our zoning code so that more folks would feel, more folks would invest, more folks would start building out some of those vacant properties. And the process had proceeded to the point where we were about to notice for public hearing on the changes, and upon reflection, I was looking at the proposed changes and I thought, wait a minute, this is really weak. Given the substantive discussions we'd had about certain kinds of things that we thought we should change and that were not in the proposed changes. And I wanted to stop and say, wait a minute, let's take a closer look at this and make sure that some of those things are there. For example, one of the big issues for us as a village is parking. And I'll take some vacant properties on Beekman Avenue that all, that all of us know, and say, in order to build back on those properties, there's a parking requirement because it's new construction. And obviously in those properties, there never was any parking because the properties come up to the street line, they line up with the other properties next to them. And we shouldn't, to my mind, and the extensive discussions we had while we were looking at the comp plan, the new comp plan, was to say, well, we shouldn't be requiring parking where there never was any parking to begin with, like properties like that. If you have an infill lot that's 25 feet wide, where the building that was there went up against the buildings on either side, you can't put parking in almost any circumstances unless you put it in a driveway right in front of the building. And that is exactly what we don't want to see in our downtown. We've got an example of that on Upper Beekman already. We want to maintain that older traditional look of having the buildings line up with one another, that look similar, and so on. Another big piece that we talked about was our zoning requirements for parking are higher than several of the communities around us or other communities in Westchester. And looking at it saying, well, we should look at lowering that, just overall lowering that parking requirement. That was one of the things that we thought was an impediment to developing some properties. So those are two examples of something that I thought we need to look at really closely and say, and I strongly believe we need to include those changes in these zoning changes that we're going to be proposing now. One of the other things that we should be looking at is design guidelines that would tell a potential developer coming in and looking at an infill lot exactly what we want. No, there aren't going to be setbacks on either side because you've got a 25-foot lot and all the buildings on either side of it are right next to each other as well. We want a uniform look on your new building. And so to make sure that those kinds of things are part of this zoning change as well. I'd asked the planning board to join us tonight because they have practical experience in a way that the trustees don't, because people come in front of them with site plans all the time and say, hey, I'm trying to make this fit on a particular lot, and end up with having to send people to the zoning board to get a variance and so on. And which causes delays, which causes more expense, which, you know, none of which I think really benefits us as a village. I think we could be more straightforward in what's in our code, make it easier for people to understand what they can do. So when they walk into the building department to start to get the process started, they already know what's there and what, in a better sense of what they can get done. I'd asked, as I said, I'd asked the planning board to join us so we could get their thoughts on this. And I know Marjorie has a couple of examples of recent projects that have come in that, and I'd like you to just talk about those if you can to help get this discussion going.
Yeah, so in our capacity as the planning board, but also as the architectural review board, we really we're trying to work with applicants to encourage development, encourage them to get through the process as quickly as possible. And what we're finding is that depending on the applicant, you know, some come in with a lot of resources and, you know, architects that, you know, have, you know, beautiful site plans and architectural detail. But really, as a village, I think in order to preserve the character at the same time as spurring more investment, in particular in the inner village, we have a couple of examples that are on the agenda for Thursday, as well as in recent past. So one that I think is a good kind of poster child for the challenge is there's a proposed change of use at 47 Clinton Street. And the lower level has always been retail space. And they want to take an existing laundromat and convert half of it into apartments. They had originally come in proposing 2 small apartments, and they actually even did a parking study in that kind of immediate vicinity of the property. And they went to the zoning board, and because of the parking requirement for these 2 apartments, they're actually now revisiting their plans and now proposing just 1 apartment in order to reduce the parking requirement. So there's apartments above the first floor retail, and the question is, you know, is our zoning code incenting the right behaviors in terms of investment in our community? We want more housing stock, and we want, you know, greater density in the village. We want it to be more affordable for people to move to the village. That's one example where parking is a real challenge in an existing building where they're just doing a change of use. The other,
can I ask you one question? What are they doing with the other side? Are they keeping it as a laundromat?
Yep.
Okay.
The other, on the other side of the stairwell will continue to operate as a laundromat.
Okay.
And obviously there's no parking today, and why should that existing nonconformance not be, carried through for this applicant? The other applicant that has had some preliminary discussions with us is also on Clinton Ave. It was a residential home that I guess burnt down. So right now it's a vacant lot. It's, not attractive, and we would love someone to go and build some housing there. And they came in with some initial plans that included a 2-car garage, which is totally out of character with the other homes that are on Clinton Street or Clinton Ave, whatever, Clinton Street. So they're very willing to take input from the planning board / ARB on adjusting their design to meet our zoning code requirements, as well as our, design requirements. But we're finding it's just taking a lot of back and forth, and even the most receptive of applicants, 30 Andrews Lane is a really good example that Tom certainly will have recall on, as well as Kirsten and Aaron and Matt, who's on from the planning board or formerly from the planning board. Is everyone's trying to shoehorn their site plan as well as their design to fit our zoning code. And so what we're doing as a planning board is we're referring applicants to the zoning board, even though it goes counter to our intuition as far as what the best design and layout and site plan are necessarily for the village. So we would love to maybe do some sort of pilot with a portion of Beekman Avenue that, will be a little laboratory to see if we can facilitate better design, quicker, more quickly getting through all of our processes, giving applicants some sort of template a la our form-based code so that they are fitting the character and integrating well with the existing architectural designs on our streets today. And the property, I think that Ken is referring to, the 3 contiguous lots that have been empty on Beekman. I've been in conversations with that property owner. Jared and I have met with them and walked around their lot. And I just came from, the reason I was late to this meeting was talking with some other residents of Sleepy Hollow. We want more placemaking, we want more pop-ups, and we want more, reasons to go downtown. So we would, as a planning board, we've been talking about this for a while and really encourage something, that addresses all of these, the form, the architecture, the parking, and, take down the barriers to entry for the village.
And one of the things that I was concerned about, to add to the thank you, Marjorie, was the current proposed changes say, oh, well, we'll provide incentives so we can lower the parking requirements, but let's get something in exchange. This is valuable, and we should extract something or get something, which in a out of context sounds smart, but I think in context it's saying, wait a minute, we're making it really hard for somebody to come in and do certain properties. If it's a big property, there's other things you can do. And these smaller properties, it's hard enough to make to come in and make that investment and make the project work. And then we're saying, okay, well, we might lower the parking requirement, but we're going to make you pay extra for that. you're going to have to do this, this, and this in order to get that approval from us. And it's like, to me, that's just absolutely the wrong signal to send to someone. It is like, no, we're not going to require the parking because it wasn't there before. There's a certain street look that we want to have that, that we think enhances the village. So let's just get rid of it. I don't think we're losing anything. I think it's the other way around, that it hurts us. It slows down people who think, that they can't build here in certain places because of those requirements. So, and then kind of extracting extra out of them, like, why? Why not make it more welcoming?
Yeah, we want to make it easier. 135 Beekman is the other property where these people have bought the property, they've invested in our village, and now are trying to figure out how to make best use of, a very long, narrow plot of land. And so as a developer, obviously they want to fit as many housing units as possible, but it's awkward because we want their street facing to be consistent with the other homes on Beekman. And, it's so central to our whole village. It really needs to look right, as well as work right, as far as pulling into the parking spaces and emergency vehicles and trash collection. And yeah.
So Marjorie, it goes to the zoning board then for consideration on the parking? Is what you're saying?
I mean, their current design is, I think, meeting the letter of the zoning code requirements. So in terms of the number of units and the number of parking spaces, but Sean will hopefully chime in, but it's not usable in its current form because you can't really pull into the spaces, and the driveway can only be, a certain width. And so, people are doing their best, applicants are doing their best to fit the letter of the code, but we have to do a lot of back and forth and massaging of these site plans in order to really determine feasibility.
Sure. The only thing the reason why I asked is, being on the committee, we had this conversation about the parking and the process and where it goes back and forth. And, it's a little to the surprise that there's been so many different things that we've been bumping into. And it's hard when you're on the committee to talk about specifics because we're not talking about the actual, everything's got a different circumstance, right? So we have to be more general in what we're understanding. So, is it the process or is it the code? And then part of the conversation, and then I'll just take a pause, is, that there's a, I don't know if I want to say leniency, but when you're taking a look at something that's custom or specialized, and Jared has been on the calls as well, that those things are being taken into consideration. So I guess the thing is really to be, whether we have no parking requirements or some parking requirements, I think really what it comes down to is, what is the actual thing that we're bumping into in the code? Because if we take everything away, I just would want to know, if you do this, then what are we consequently going to be dealing with? Not to say it's not the right decision. I just think we have to have our eyes wide open, because otherwise that would have been probably a pretty significant consideration. And parking was more of a tactic to some of the things that we were tackling in terms of being very, I know, Jared, you don't like this word, but in my mind, very, very spot specific. We needed to just change certain zones. We didn't get into the parking per se. That was kind of like a thing that was coming secondarily. And that's why I think also the mayor is saying, well, wait a second, let's not leave it for another layer. Let's bring it into this fold. But I think it's really important to understand, why are we bumping into this? And we had a whole committee of so many weeks of conversation, and we've had the zoning, it was made up of a steering committee to get all the input. So I kind of want to step back for a second and understand, you know, what there were certain intentions with the understanding that parking is a problem. So I don't know why we're bumping into some of these things.
So just to follow on, I think with some things that everyone that's spoken has said so far, I feel like, Sandra, to your point, like we can be pretty surgical and strategic with the code, right? Ken mentioned 25-foot wide lots. I mean, honestly, most of the lots in our downtown area and on side streets are pretty much 25 feet wide, right? And there's exceptions to the rule. On those lots, right, narrow lots that have no access from the rear, it's impossible to park the lot, right? It's just completely impossible unless you're doing parking in front of the building and you're cutting in a curb cut, right? Which is just not desirable. So like we could write rules based on particular lot configurations so that we're achieving this goal that was articulated by Marjorie and Ken. And just to bring up, you know, Marjorie was talking about replicating character, right? It's so hard to get an applicant to follow particular design suggestions when you're doing it verbally, right? Like I've watched some of these meetings and there's no diagramming. I mean, our planning board unfortunately doesn't have anything really to point at to give a visual recommendation to an applicant. So it's all verbally done. And it's almost like, you know, you went to the Met Museum and you saw all of this great art, and then you're not allowed to show anybody what you saw. You have to describe it. And that's never going to be as effective as being able to actually show someone a reference. And so I think, to Marjorie's point and to some of Ken's points, a visual code is like really important. And we're starting to see a lot of communities, even in Westchester and throughout the country, you know, adopt a visual code. And I think, and we've seen this, right, with the committee for Lower Beekman in particular, we moved in the direction of design guidelines. And I personally think it could go much further than, you know, what we've done in committee. And I think that's what Marjorie is sort of suggesting as well, that we could kind of push the envelope almost as a test bed, because this particular area was called out as being extremely strategic because it is the zone that connects us to our waterfront, right? And if we don't get it right and we allow projects that are, I mean, honestly botched, we're going to really impact whether or not our downtown is viable, and pulling in some of that disposable income that will live down at Edge on Hudson to support our local businesses, right? So like we really, really have to get it right. I think it is probably, besides Upper Beekman itself, I would say Lower Beekman is maybe our most strategic area in Sleepy Hollow, because it's the route to success in our downtown for small business. Yeah.
I kind of feel like we don't know what we don't know. And so kind of going back to, you know, my product development background, I'd like to do a section of the village and do kind of a launch and learn, like get some new code in place, see if that spurs easier, quicker, better development, and then tweak the code as needed, and then expand it out to other parts of the village that would benefit from zoning code changes.
Marjorie, of the codes that did come in, because we're talking about the same area, I mean, it's that, is there something in there that was recommended that you would want to take further, or that you would want to change? What's it? Because I think if we're going to talk about the code, we should be then going right in there surgically to and say, what is it? Because we did put something together. So let's put that in place. I mean, I don't know else how to have the conversation. And then we have to strip it out. And there was a clear reason why the planning board wasn't on the zoning committee. If we go back as to the reason why, is that we never, and Marjorie, we talked about this, just so everybody understands, is you can't have the keeper on the committee, because we never want to put them in that position of, well, this is the reason why the steering committee didn't include the planning board. It has zoning, it has all the key stakeholders.
That's not true. I mean,
That's
Matt,
what this,
Matt Brennan is on your committee, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't see him on
Yeah.
the, but what I guess the thing is all the parties we put in place to have on there. So I think it's great that we're bringing everybody together, but I want to understand what do we feel that we're bumping into in the code?
Let me, if I may, Margie, let me jump on this, okay? Because I think parts of it are really simple. It's like we have a 25-foot lot in the middle of a bunch of other 25-foot lots that's empty, and there's buildings on the other side. We do not want to require parking on that lot when it's locked in around the sides and on the back. The only way you can have parking there is to put a driveway right in the front, in the middle, and break up the streetscape. And it's like, we don't want that. I mean, I think we can agree on that. So we start off and say, okay, if it's infill in this kind of this part of the village, on this block or these blocks or this defined area, and the lot is of a certain size, you're not going to have to create parking, period. And then we're not going to force you to pay extra because you don't have to do parking. But to me, I'd say, can we agree on that? And if we can, which I think we should, then we say, okay, well, let's put that in. Let's put that in, that specific thing. Let's define what those streets are going to be, or those blocks are going to be, and say, for that size lot, you're not going to have a parking requirement. And then the next part of it is saying, okay, for that same block, if we look at the 3 vacant spots on Beekman Avenue, do we want the building pushed to the back of the lot? I was like, no, I don't think so. I think we want the building or buildings, when those get built out, to be, there's a contiguous through line. Not that all of the buildings look exactly the same or whatever, but that they line up. The front of the building lines up at the same spot at the other ones adjacent buildings do on the sidewalk. And, and that's a simple guideline. We want it to look like that. And so then it's a matter of how do you write that into the code so that we have that.
Well, wasn't that those ideas like part of the recommendations that we got from the consultants a couple of weeks ago? They were saying, part of their recommendations were, the consideration for parking, the aesthetic of the building to be consistent with what's already there, saying, somebody doesn't have to have a tree in front of their house if it didn't make sense, so those little things, I think, we're gonna definitely incent people to say, okay, if I have some flex, I'm gonna try to stay within the, the existing feel of what the downtown looks like, but I can do this and I can do that and I don't have to worry about parking. But I think I don't know, do we want to just change one code at a time, or do we want to have sort of like a comprehensive set of ideas, right?
Yeah, you do. And for me, the reason I pulled it from the agenda before we went ahead was, it's like, wait a minute, we're doing this much, and in the comprehensive plan, we called for much more than that. And it's like, I don't want to like inch forward when we're going through this process anyway. Let's put some of the stuff in place, at least the stuff that we talked about extensively, like that one parking requirement, like lowering our overall parking requirement, so that we're at least lined up with most of our neighbors in terms of what we require. The other kinds of things that are in there, it's not that we toss the whole thing at all. I was just startled in the end that some elements that we thought were critical were not included. And I just don't see the point of saying, well, we the way I read it anyway, we might reduce the parking, but only after we've extracted certain concessions from you to make it go forward. That's not an open door kind of a thing. It's like, and then we end up with something like, okay, I'm going to build the parking. Show me how I'm going to do it in the current code on this lot. You can't without. you know, so.
Yeah. So speaking of construction, I've got literally like someone hammering right above my head. So if you hear it, ignore it, please.
We don't.
We I think that the consultants, that we're working with the committee and what they've produced is like surely a first step, right? Like it's moving in the proper direction. We're actually, like this was presented in the last meeting. We're getting feedback from the community. Folks have emailed us. We're hearing from the planning board, right? And what's consistent about the feedback is, and even Ken expressed this, right, is it's just not going far enough. Understanding too, right? Like we're not going to do, we're probably not going to do the entire code, right? Like we can be strategic about this and focus on, this test bed area, like Marjorie mentioned on Lower Beekman, but we can do things as well that are more broad-based, like, for example, the limitation on restaurants and bars within 200 linear feet of each other. Like, yes, that's out, right? Like, and then I think we could also be strategic across the board on these 25 or less than 30-foot wide lots, like the non-conforming lot issue, right? Those are more broad-based that I feel like we can tackle them now. Surely we can get a form-based code like overlay on Lower Beekman as well now for sure. And then see how it goes and then come back and do other overlays, right? We've got a floating zone, right? Like we've got the ability to amend different zones and create additional overlays that bring us to where we want to be. And I agree, like Sam, yeah, like a lot of the suggestions from the comp plan and from the community made it into the recommendations from BFJ. But it's just like, and we're getting that feedback. It's just not gone far enough. Like it's just not getting us over the finish line, like where we want to be.
So what do you think is the gap from, where the current recommendation is to something that we think is a viable set of changes to the code that we would be willing to, do a pilot in Lower Beekman? Like, can we kind of enumerate what those other things that we want to continue to change are, and what would it take to incorporate them?
I would love to answer that question, but Kirsten has been like trying to talk for, I don't know, half an hour.
Sorry, Kirsten, as chair, it's my job to recognize people, and the chair recognizes, but you have to be more emphatic.
Yeah, I was just letting everybody get their 2 cents in before I add mine to the mix. But a lot of what I'm thinking isn't dissimilar to what's been said already. But I do see kind of different categories of comments, and to just say like what the BFJ's put forward and presented. It's got a lot of great stuff, and some of it's really easy, and I think is a no-brainer. And we would write as a planning board, we support that. Yeah, that's great. Like, go forward. But there's some areas where we'd love to see even more, has been said. And I think in terms of the form-based code, the diagrams they created, I was kind of curious: is that literally what would be in the code, or is that just an example of what they would do, and it still has more detail to come? And I think I'd love to see that just fleshed out a little bit more. And I would love eventually to see that even in other areas, because our village has very distinct characters, almost like block by block or street by street. So it does require a certain level of work and finessing that maybe is, gets phased later. So we focus on this one pilot project. Great, we can get really detailed in that now, and later we'll do something similar if it seems successful in other zones. Well, I would say on the planning board, having that to back us would help a lot, because as Jared mentioned, it's like when we provide our comments, especially say from an architectural review board standpoint, aesthetically, how we would like to see things improve. Like maybe everything meets code, and I can say also applicants either do everything they can to avoid the ZBA variances, and so, but sometimes the end result is sacrifice. Like it's not the best design, so that's a whole other conversation. But if it comes down to more, first we're dealing with the volume, and we're dealing with trying to help them get the best project possible. Sometimes our own code limits us. And then sometimes it's the, professionals on the other side of the table. that maybe limit our ability to work with and improve that design. But if we had those visual guidelines that we could say, this is what you need to do, then that would help those people that need that extra help. And it would make it really clear. We wouldn't have that discrepancy between what we say and then how they interpret it, what they do when they come back. And it's like, I think it would be more efficient on that front to get the results we want, to keep things in the character. I mean, I think our big goal would be to have infill happen in the inner village or downtown in a way that meets the character that's there now. So anything we can do, both in changing the code across the board, and I would do that. I'm definitely, I think a lot. So anyway, and the other would be this like overlay of form-based code where we can and have that grow from it. But just to say on the side of things like parking on narrow lots, that's never possible. Same would be true with a lot of the setbacks as the code requires. I feel like parking and setbacks in that can't be met by existing non-conforming sites are some of the biggest things we see that would be the easiest to resolve by just not making them have to do it, because it doesn't have a result we want anyway. And so that would be something where I feel like maybe the proposals are starting to get there, but we could go even more. We could do more now, I think, safely. But
Ken, it's Tom. Your comments about parking and loosening or relaxing the regulations to encourage faster development, I find these very interesting, and I support it, and not just to try to help this be a faster meeting. But I do want to mention something, kind of a practical balance, right? So if we, and again, I agree with what you are saying, but I think we need to balance it with somehow adding more parking elsewhere. Because if we think about it, if we loosen parking regulations for a lot, we're adding cars to the street. It's a given, it's a fact. Not only that, if they have no need to have parking on their property, then they'll build more units, more bedrooms, and there'll be even more cars, which again is fine. But if you're a business and your street is full of residents that are parking, then where are your customers going to park? So we need to consider how to allow for that.
Hey, Tom, I hear what you're saying, but the one thing that I would say is I think that a lot of people who are going to be moving to Edge as well as to Sleepy Hollow, there are going to be a lot of young people who are going to be walking to things, walking to the train, biking. And with before COVID, we were pretty much on a very strict trajectory to getting automated cars. And I got to tell you, and I would say within 3 to 5 years, people are going to get on their phone, call for the car, have them dropped off at the station. They're not going to get a car. A lot, and a lot of the futurists are already saying more and more people are not going to be buying cars in the future. So I think that whole industry is going to come. And so one way to mitigate for the concern of less parking would be, let's be very strategic about where we would allow, fewer parking situations, right? Because I do think that in the next 5 to 10 years, you're not going to have a lot of people who are going to be living down there who are going to own cars. It's just like Brooklyn now, where people take the train or the subway and they consciously don't buy a vehicle because they don't want to deal with having to find a parking spot.
I agree with that point. Yeah, I do.
I just one quick thought. I'm sorry, Denise, go ahead, please.
I just want to chime in on this, and I've been saying this since I, became a board member 6 years ago. This isn't Brooklyn; it is the suburbs, and I think I look at it this way. And Sam, you're right. There are people. There is a trend of people, not driving as much. But again, this is the suburbs, and if I'm going to a restaurant in Pleasantville, I'm driving to Pleasantville. I'm gonna need a place to park my car. So I think that's the case here. If we want people to come and, other than people who live in Sleepy Hollow, if we want to attract tourists and people who live outside of our town, we need to provide a place for them to park. A lot of people taking mass transit. I can tell you that. My sister-in-law coming from Armonk is not taking the bus. So, that's something you have to consider, is providing alternate parking if we're going to lose parking.
And I will say, I think it's an important component, because these were discussions that came from the committee. And we were talking about the fact that we had to then figure out alternate parking that was going to be provided. And so then therefore, do you pull the rug so quickly to then say no parking and then give no alternate place to park? And then we're really backed into a corner? Or do you evolve there and see what's coming, and our plan from the comprehensive plan of taking it to the next stage? Because I was then going to include, where else would we put parking? And I think it's really important, because the scope of the work from what we were touching, and I think that we have to go back, and Anthony can support this, we had a certain scope on this project, and we were really defining it when we started hitting parking, that we had to be careful. If we put no parking, what were we going to do? And it's what Tom is speaking to. I'm just letting you know what it was a discussion. I just want to put it out there.
Yeah, really.
Jared, hang on.
Yeah.
Why don't we take the easy one? I go back to Tom's question about that, and I'll take the laundromat example that Marjorie brought up before. So viable business, no parking. Okay.
Sure.
So now they want to create they would like to create 2 dwelling units, now maybe 1. Arguably 2 dwelling units is going to be less than all of the customers that would normally be coming to well, they had no parking requirement before, and the building hasn't changed in its size and how it occupies the lot. It's just the use of the building itself, which to me, it seems like the actual parking needs of the building would go down if they're moving from commercial to residential. So for me, one of the easy ones is like, okay, yeah, there's some big picture kind of stuff. Do we create a parking lot, a garage? Where are we going to do all of that? We can't look at this and say, we're not going to change the code in the meantime, because we haven't answered that question. I would say, well, where can we answer that question?
I think we're doing more of a modified one.
But Sandra, let me pose this. If we have an existing lot where there is a building and there's a change of use, why would we now require parking? Okay, that makes no sense to me.
I'm talking about the broad blanket.
Wait, and if we have an existing lot that we define as one of these infill lots, whatever that may be, on whatever block or street that may be, why would we require parking when there was no parking there before? So the person that's going to put up that building is going to look and say, I know I have no parking. So can I get a retail customer for the first floor to rent my space? Or the whole thing is residential. Can I rent it or sell it when there's no parking there? They're making that calculation upfront when they do the investment. But it's the same thing as the person that buys the building next door that has no parking, where they're not going to change the building and saying, yeah, I think I can make this work as an investment. So to me, we should at least knock off the low-hanging fruit here to say the places where there is no parking now, or was no parking, to say, okay, those we're not going to require parking. So, that is one piece of it. I don't see any reason why we can't do that. None.
Yeah, there's a lot of gray area in this. Like, I would caution against thinking like blanket sort of thinking, right? Or black and white sort of thinking, right? We could be really strategic and surgical with how we amend this code, right? So that we're not creating difficult parking conditions, right? For example, with Chico's, we wouldn't say no parking requirement, right? That would just be silly. Right? So, or like,
they have a lot that's this big. for a store that's, this big.
Sure. So, and then also, can we be strategic just outside of this discussion around parking, right? Like, can we use some of our existing parking assets in a more efficient way, right? And that's like a whole different discussion. But in the meantime, right, we have empty lots on Beekman that are like a super drag on, how people perceive this community. And I think there's an urgent need to solve those very strategic issues, and doing it in a way that doesn't create like the problem that Denise, you articulated, right? Like, we want to attract people from throughout Westchester to come and visit us and visit our businesses, right? But we don't necessarily want to turn into a strip mall. So you have to find that balance, and I think we could do it. I really do. Like, design is an amazing thing. And there's ways to achieve it. So, I mean, personally, like, I'm really in favor of taking what BFJ has done, like, probably, maybe this is a workshop, right? Like, we probably should be doing this right now, but like going through piece by piece, we probably need more time to do that. It would be helpful if it was in person, honestly, to figure out what have they recommended that we want, which I think like all the recommendations, Kirsten said this, we want pretty much all the recommendations. We just like want a little bit more, right? And how do we pursue that? Like, do we pursue it with BFJ? Or do we add to it outside of a BFJ contract? Like, what, how do we get to where we need to be so that we're then having a public hearing and then forwarding these new rules to the county and then eventually adopting a code, right?
Well,
So what's the
Jared,
next step?
Jared, to your point, I think, it's really hard to kind of like do it without seeing, what the impact would be. But I think we've already got a document that we can use. We already have like very specific feelings about what we want to keep and what we want to avoid. And I would love to hear from Sean and Anthony in terms of like, what they could do to help us like look at this in a way where we can have a menu of things that we decide, okay, we're going to go with this in this specific area for now. We're going to see how it goes, going to monitor it for a year or whatever. And then, see where there might be benefits to expanding what we're doing. Or maybe we say, oh, we don't really like what's happening and maybe we hold off. But I'd love to hear from Sean, what your thinking is based on what you've heard tonight. And I know that you've been in the mix of this since the beginning.
Well, thanks, Sam. The one thing I will say is zoning is not really it really can't be done in that sense as a trial, because once you change the zoning and people start building things, it's done. We live with that. So you really have to rely on the studies, historical data, and precedent examples. And then you have to listen to the professionals that are giving you the advice and then implement the zoning, because it's really hard to go backwards after it's already installed. The other thing too is we're only really talking about very limited number of parcels. So you're not going to see the impacts for a long time. For example, we have a few lots on Beekman Avenue. We know what the initial problem is with that, but changing the zoning for just a limited number of parcels could have, larger ramifications years from now. So you have to really just be aware of changing the zoning to sort of spot zone things to make quick changes. I really think that a lot of this is in the hands of the planning board. Our current zoning really allows for our planning board to do a lot of the things that you're asking for right now. For example, the application at 135 Beekman Avenue, they've come in with a code compliant design. Meets all the requirements from a zoning perspective only. but it's a planning application because it gives the planning board, and especially now that the planning board has the duties of the architecture review board, even more power to mold that project exactly the way, according to the things that you're describing. It's getting that point to the design professionals working on it and to make that agreement. Okay, they're looking at the applicant is looking at it differently from the perspective of the village. You know, with no due bad respect to them, it's clearly a numbers thing. They purchased this property for an amount and they want to develop it and get a return on it. It's a business for them. The village has to live with that forever. So changing the zoning may not really help here. The power is really invested in the planning board to make these decisions and to work with that person, that applicant, to make a better design. We have things built, you know, for example, on the Clinton Street project, small lot, undersized. They want to put a 2-family house there, perfectly compliant. They have every right to want a garage. The planning board had decided not really a great idea in that location, and they're working with that applicant. We've also have advised them, and there are things built into our zoning that says, you know what, you can build that building back to where it used to be, in line with the current buildings that are there and not require variance. So there's things already built into our code that there's really no need for a change. I mean, I'm always looking to make it better, but that building can be built exactly the way everyone wants it to be. We just have to get the applicant to propose it.
Well, the thing is that, you know, from what I was hearing, the way Marjorie described it initially was, we wanted to put something in place to attract investment and attract businesses, whoever, a homeowner, to come in and see that, you know what, it's not going to be that difficult to do what they want to do. You know,
well, the 135 Beekman's a perfect example. They paid a good amount for a property that's viable. They did their math and decided, hey, I could put 15 units there and make a return on it. There was no need to change the zoning there. That worked.
So
yeah, but what's interesting, actually, what's interesting about that one, right, is, you know, the planning board has concerns over the bulk and the massing and the access and the setback and the way the facade is treated on Beekman. And that is a condition of what the zoning is doing, right? It's not necessarily the economics. Like, that landlord or that owner could potentially, with different zoning, max that lot out in a different shape or bulk and do better than what is being proposed. He's forced to provide, you know, a proposal that's non-ideal. I think that's like a nice way of saying it, because he's forced to conform with the code, you know, and the only way for planning to get what they want is to convince him to propose something that violates the code. So then he goes into ZBA and hope that ZBA approves the thing that violates the code, but it's a better outcome for the community. It's a better architectural and design outcome that fits within, you know, the design parameters that we're looking to achieve to, you know, improve this part of Beekman Avenue.
Right,
So
but
I'd
that-
say that
but
that is the
that
problem.
requires a lot of work, right? So
Yeah, but the
question
code,
is-
I'm sorry, Sam, but the code is currently not putting any burden on the applicant. It's their way that they've designed it. That's the failure here.
The
So
code
you're
is
right. There's currently a lot of different ways that they can still provide a solution on that lot. Their professionals decided to propose the one that is not.
But if he
working right
wants
now.
15 units, he has to do it inside that box. There's no other way to do it. He's maxing out the code and he's fitting that envelope, right? If you wanted to restack those units, right, and achieve the same economic outcome, right? He's trying to maximize how much rent he can get. If you wanted to restack it, would then necessarily violate the code. So it's almost like this
Well,
interesting.
it doesn't, because he can actually leave the existing multifamily house where it is and propose a detached structure on that lot, and you would get the same return probably. So there are other solutions that would still be compliant with the code. Again, it's the choice of the
You're on mute.
applicant.
You're on mute, Ken.
Thank you, Sam. Guys, we're getting into a project discussion.
Right.
This is a zoning discussion. It's helpful to talk about specific projects to illustrate a point, but now we're, getting into an interesting, but what I suspect will be a long discussion about what all could happen on a particular piece of property. And we don't need to go there right now.
That's what's so difficult about these conversations, right? Because you want to have a conversation about something that's very visual, and we're literally just looking at each other.
Part of it's visual. Marjorie?
Going back to Sandra's question as to whether the problem is the code or if the problem is the process, if we accept Sean's statement that the code is fine, that suggests that the problem is the planning board process, because it is so iterative, right? For years, we were working with the 30 Andrews Lane applicant, trying to massage them to fit on that property and to get the setbacks. And now we're looking back in hindsight saying, why did we have that, very dramatic setback? And so it was just, continuing to kind of cajole that site plan in order to enable the emergency access, the open space requirements on a per unit basis, the parking. So it was just such a long, drawn out, iterative process trying to nurture that application along. I would think that if we had more kind of blatantly obvious code, then the applicant would enter the process with more of their design and their site plan, so that the process could be less onerous, because we're giving them like a template for how to design and lay out so that we could facilitate them getting the approvals and getting to building sooner rather than later.
Yeah, the code, I think there's always room for changes and modifications in the code, and it should be a document that's sort of fluid. And as you see failures, you can go back and make changes. I think that's always good. On the point of the parking though, and specifically, we talked about the Clinton Street laundromat multifamily building. In that particular case there, it's not really a question of the number of spaces there, and it usually never is with the zoning board. When there's a change of use, we always look at it as, does that change of use, which requires the planning board approval, create a bigger burden for parking? And that's where in that particular case, believe it or not, although you think laundromat, a lot of people, it's based upon the square footage as opposed to the residential parking requirement that's based upon the unit number and the bedrooms. So in this case, actually changing to the residential did require more parking. That may be where the code can be changed. But again, in this particular application, the planning board has the ability to make that recommendation to the zoning board, either negatively, positively, or with any other conditions. And most times when that's done by, prior planning boards, the zoning board will rule with it. So again, I would be a little cautious in outright changing numbers to eliminate it, because it does give the planning board that ability to say, what, is that a good change? And that's what the question really is. It's not about the number of parking, it's one or two spaces anyway, but it should be, should that space be changed from a commercial use to a residential use? Because again, that ends up changing the fabric of that neighborhood when those changes are made.
And if I remember from my own planning board days, you do want to have that extra layer in there for when there is a change of use. I understand what you're saying, Ken, like if it's a change of use and it seems like it's fine, just push it through. But you do want to have that conversation. And if we've got some guardrails around that to kind of help, you know, push that through differently. We, you know, because before you know it, we might be changing all the laundromats to something else that we might not want. And even with some of the recommendations that were put together, we did script out a little bit more of what our intentions were and the kind of businesses that we want. So I do think you do want some of the change of use to come in front of the boards, just so you can simply see it.
That's a good example of one that we wouldn't, I don't think, diverge from what the BFJ recommendation was.
Yeah, I mean, but we also went through all those segments of businesses.
Right.
We really script that out. We talked about what it meant if we had medical offices and do we want that, and what kind of impact that would have, and why we put that on list. And I just say this as more of a generality so that everybody understands the conversations we had in the committee. And that's where I go back to, if we make this change, then short-term, long-term, what are we going to get from it? I'm not opposed, because we do know that parking is an issue. And if we want to, but if we take it all away and then they can just go ahead and do a speed process, just let's be mindful. And if I could just make one other point, perhaps, and I do know that Sean has this list, and maybe there's a little bit of an education when people come in front, because we're going to get more people. We script out a little bit more of what the expectation is. I know it's there, but let us understand more of what that is. And maybe there's something in tweaking the process, not the planning. I'm not saying that it's a poor thing on the planning board of a process or this, but sometimes it's the collaboration and the alignment of the processes. Are they synchronized?
Yeah, I think, you know, on both sides of what we're talking about, you can make a pretty good argument for either case. You know, you could make a good argument to say, well, we don't want to stretch the zoning so much that it compromises what enforcement we have after the fact. But at the same time, we still have this issue, which is, how do we incentivize people to go ahead and do development that's going to be in the spirit and character of the village, right? So I think, you know, obviously we're not going to make a decision tonight, but I think what's going to be important is for us to kind of figure out what are the positives and negatives to making these choices, really sitting down and understanding them, and then making a decision. Because, you know, the bottom line is, developers out there talk to each other, all right? And they say, well, I don't know about Sleepy Hollow, because I go there and I'll be in, dealing with the planning board for 2.5 years. They're not going to want to come to do anything here, right? So we don't want to have the rules so restrictive that it gives you a lot of leeway to kind of decide, because people don't want to take that much time. They want to know going in, I can do this, I can do that, and I can do the other. And I don't want to have to figure that out after a year of conversation with the planning board. I want to be able to go in and have a clear understanding of what I can do. And that's
Sam,
what's going to
anybody who's interested in development does that study before they even call us. And all that information is already in the code. All the bulk and zoning requirements are there. They figure it out before they even call us. It's more of a financial analysis that they're worried about, and how much.
Sean, granted. Okay, like two things. One is, Sam's right. We're not going to decide anything tonight. We need to work on this more. The other part of it is, I think Sam's right. I think we can provide more guidance by changing some parts of our code, and we need to continue to work on that, so that they do that work ahead of time and they know what they've got. You know, I will just leave it with this one thing. Somebody show me how, I'm looking forward to you convincing me that on that 25-foot lot, there is a reason to not eliminate the parking requirement. So, look, we will come back to this. Marjorie, last word.
Yeah, it sounds like between the committee and the trustees and the planning board, we're all supportive of the BFJ current recommendations, but we all want to supplement them with additional items. And so the planning board has drafted a letter kind of articulating the things we would like to further extend to the current zoning code changes. So we'll send that along to Sandra and the trustees. And then my question is, who is going to compile it, all the items that we've discussed as a work session today, to kind of bring it to kind of a draft stage that we can all say, yep, this is what we want to go forward with.
The person who always compiles it. Thank you for stepping up, Mr. Giacchio.
I knew that was coming. I knew it.
Thank you, Anthony.
Look, I look forward to continue this conversation. I want to thank Marjorie and the members of the planning board for participating with us tonight, and look forward to being able to continue this on issues like this or discussions like this that really, I think, are enhanced by your presence. So thank you for participating tonight. We're going to move on to our next agenda item, which includes a member of the planning board. It's a continuation of discussion we started before that Kirsten kicked off. Ms. Harries, we want to go back to that. I know there was multiple follow-up discussions afterwards, away from the meetings, one-on-one with a lot of folks. So let's pick it up again.
Correct. I was just going to attempt to.
If you're speaking, I can't.
Do you hear me now?
Hear you.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Still can't.
I don't know. I can't hear you.
Yeah, Ken, we can hear Kirsten. We could
Okay,
also hear you, Ken.
I'm
Now
glad
I
you
can.
so you can hear me. I just want to thank you for having me back. And I just wanted tonight to give a little update on what's been happening since I last saw you, and to also say that I heard the comments that were shared last time. I followed up with an email kind of addressing some of it, but we'll mention tonight kind of how that has informed the conversation that's been continuing since then. So basically, I've had various meetings with a lot of different parties on the village side. We met out at the site twice. Let me just make sure I can go down here. Oops, sorry. So basically, we started by meeting at the intersection I mentioned last time, Pecanico and Beekman, and kind of even asked the question, is this the one to start at, or should we be focusing elsewhere? And kind of all agreed that this should be the first place of focus, in part because of the adjacency to Morse School and the concern of safety for the students there. Also because of the previous studies and prototyping done by SHIAC and their walkability study. And even the principal at Morris, Principal Wally, when I called him to reach out and kind of start the conversation again with him, he remembered the previous work that had been done and inquired, was this the continuation of that or something new? And I, responded, a continuation of that, is our hope. Like I said, we had Chief Boetti there, we had members of Public Space Council, trustees, SHIAC, the community liaison. And so, and we looked at the intersection, talked about our strategies, and I'll go into detail in a second about that. I also subsequently talked to the owners of both Coco and Justin's Deli and got some input from them, and plan to talk to the other businesses along that block. And I had an initial conversations with the principal, and tomorrow I have a meeting scheduled with him and the art teacher. He was very excited about any opportunity, not only to improve the safety of the students who might be walking through that intersection, but to have a more public face or the power that art can have, and that if it's kind of acknowledging and of the school's presence there, welcoming to the students, and saying that they always have this challenge of having a school that was designed to be a high school, but yet now isn't occupied by first and second graders. So they welcome anything they can help make that seem like a welcoming space, be it starting at the intersection itself, and then we're going to even talk to them about things on the school grounds to kind of continue and potential other collaborations with them, public art wise. So he seemed really supportive and excited. The business owners as well, they said they're watching that intersection. They know its current state needs improvement. They too are concerned about parking and have, that's the one thing that's definitely always in balance between, as we talk about bump outs that might take away parking, there's these two sides trying to, find the happy balance, because they said their customers are probably half pedestrian, half driving. And I think not to go too deep on parking, but just knowing we've mentioned it earlier tonight, I think it definitely warrants studying the specifics of the parking and how to improve it. Like a lot of those spots probably could be for shorter periods of time, because a lot of people end up using the no parking areas illegally to kind of stop and go, and they just need to pick up food. And so like if more spots were turned into 15-minute spots, that might help during certain hours. And then in the overnight when businesses are closed, that residents that live along there could park. So I think the parking conversation is for another day and another group, but definitely requires kind of understanding all the nuances of the specifics of our village and the businesses and residents that are there. But anyway.
Kirsten, sorry, it's Tom. I may have missed a meeting, but I don't think I did. When I don't agree that there was an indication of what would be the first intersection, or that we voted on it or anything. So I would like to suggest that if we were to go forward with this, and by the way, I'm a fan of the project, love the idea. However, I will suggest we take this to a side street. I'm going to suggest the corner of Valley and Chestnut as the starting point, rather than the corner of Beekman and Pecanico. I just want to put that out there. I don't believe we voted on anything actually yet, but when it does come that time, I would vote that we start with a side street.
Okay. No, you have not voted, so it's not a done deal. It was just to pursue or for the conversation. But Ken
is muted. Ken is having audio issues.
Yep.
To Tom's point, and sorry for interrupting, Kirsten. So to Tom's point.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Do it now, Ken.
Okay. What I wanted to just say, Kirsten, there's more to your presentation.
Yeah, I'll be fast.
Go through the presentation. I'm going to give you another 45 seconds, and then because I think there'll be several discussion items. So let's go through that, and then we can come back. Okay.
Slides. They're just visuals of kind of, last time I showed you some images of the range of what's possible, and I definitely heard the feedback and understand the concerns of certain possibilities. So I just tonight included other images that are more in the vein of focusing on painting being at the bump outs that would both reduce the intersection distance for people walking across, but also I think a really good priority of that specific intersection, bringing the stop signs out away from the parked cars so that they're visible to drivers. So that would happen in that bumped out zone. And then the other kind of possibility is a crosswalk that is maybe enhanced with color. So these are just the first slides show those examples where the crosswalk remains fairly traditional and the painting is reserved for the bump out areas or the curb extensions as a strategy. We also, last meeting, I know the mayor mentioned kind of the three-dimensional crosswalk. And so these are some examples of that remain not, how to say, they look fairly traditional except for that added third dimension and illusion that you're seeing. And this the one with the kids standing on it was done or proposed by a Girl Scout troop in Connecticut. And you see them popping up around the country, often proposed by students. And then these are ones that kind of just, once again, maybe look fairly traditional, but have some enhancement of color to make them a little more playful. And this is going even one step further in that direction. Just want to point out too, we were, I've been consulting the NACTO standards for street design, and just kind of the difference between what's currently in the proposed plan for the Beekman sidewalk project, and then what could still be possible as a change order, and do we want to make those changes? And so I've started that conversation with the engineer for the project, and just sent out our questions, and hope to continue that conversation. And then just a little flash of the past of when this was talked about in a previous iteration, and the school was involved, that the students had kind of given some, ideas of what they might want to see in a curb extension. So if going forward, whether we pursue that kind of collaboration or whether we invite an artist, that would be one of those next steps. And to say that the design's not defined, that's still yet to come. But and so that's just the time frame from last time. And that's it. I'll stop sharing.
Can you, Kirsten, go back to the one where you're showing some of those bump outs? There's one where one is maroon, and then there's like a polka dot one.
Yep.
So question about, wait for her to get there. Okay, so this one, right? The maroon one is pretty standard, right? Like typically in that NACTO handbook on striping, it'll be maroon, tan, or green, right? And that's how you restripe and do what's called a neck down or a bump out. Tom, are you opposed to restriping, or are you opposed to like the bright mural painting?
Right. I am in favor of a placemaking project. I am opposed to it starting in one of the more prominent intersections. I'm vehemently opposed to that. I want to be clear.
Right. So
we
I'd
also
like
hang
to
on.
add-
Hang on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Denise.
I just want to say, I'll take the answer to that question as well. I am opposed to murals in the street. I don't like it. I think it's too much. I'm more, and I said last time, I'm a traditionalist, and I think it detracts from a Hudson Valley river town. I'm just not for the murals.
Wait,
direct question.
Hang on a second. A second. So we're going to, I think, lead into this is going to lead into a work committee of the board, or members of the board working with the existing committee with Kirsten. We are not going to, I think, come to a decision tonight about, okay, let's go to this intersection or not, or let's not do any of it. I think there's probably, majority that, I think there's a majority that says, yeah, let's do this and let's figure out where we're going to do it. So the don't do it at all is likely to lose out. But then we get into a lot of the details of this about exactly well, is it this color? What's the vehement opposition to this intersection versus another one? What differences it make and why? I think there's a lot to work with here, and there are other elements that we should be working on as well that tie in with this, and one of those specifically is the intersection of Beekman and Cortland. What happens with that we've talked about for 3 years now. What I would like to see us do is have some folks from the board work with Kirsten and whoever the group is, and to follow up on this. There is, I would say this, the guiding point to it is that the board is in favor, generally speaking, of doing some part of this, and you guys go and figure out where and what, and bring it back to us.
We'll say that currently Jared and I have been working with Kirsten along with the chief.
Well, let's add in, I'm going to volunteer either Denise or Tom.
I'm more than happy to join the team there.
And so am I.
Yeah.
So really quick, right? So there's two very different things here, right? One thing is an engineering standard, right? Which is NACTO, it's the National Association for City Transportation Officials. Okay. And then there's painting a mural like on top of it, right? Those are somewhat related, but very different things, right? And so, you know, I understand like the concern over murals at like a very prominent intersection because it visually changes the intersection, I think, dramatically in some cases, right? I get what you're saying, Denise. I'm
Okay.
wondering is there any opposition to following an engineering standard that's been adopted by like
Oh,
many
Jared, of
cities?
course not. But here's
Yeah.
the thing. We spent a lot of money and a lot of time on a comprehensive plan. Look at page 87. Page 87 has graphics of what the consultants that did the comprehensive plan recommend for treatments on crosswalks in Sleepy Hollow.
Right.
Those include bricks, concrete, and cobblestone. Guess what? I'm in favor of all of those.
Cool.
All right. That is what the comprehensive plan recommends.
Are you in
Why do we
favor
need to
of
do
an-
anything different?
Wait,
Yeah.
stop.
Right.
Committee meeting.
I think we should
Okay.
have a breakout
enough.
meeting.
Yeah, like, no. Okay.
We don't have to, yeah.
Wait, nope. The chair
I'm just-
recognizes nobody except himself. Kirsten, can you stop sharing your screen, please? I'm weary of the polka dots.
See, thank you.
Guys, work out a time when you can continue to do this and work through the details of this. And I look forward to you reporting back to the board. Okay?
Okay.
I'll
All right.
send an email to coordinate a meeting time.
All right, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for being back with us, Kirsten. All right.
Thank you, Kirsten.
Next up, I think this will be relatively quick. Our next agenda item is a maintenance agreement with the clock at the top of Beekman. Mr. Giacchio, you want to walk us through this, please?
Yeah, as everybody knows, that clock is a challenge, keeping the right time. We want to make sure that we can do that consistently. So we'll want to enter into an annual maintenance agreement with the company that installed the clock. And you have a copy of that agreement.
And just to reiterate, our opting out is the agreement is for
A year. We can, yeah, it's for 1 year. We have to
right.
renew each.
Okay.
Yep. Sorry about
Just
that.
want to make sure that everybody, understands that it's not a lifetime commitment.
Correct.
I was going to say we're not getting married to these guys, and that's not always a lifetime commitment anymore. So
And I think the timing is right.
okay, great.
would-
So can we put
I
it
would-
on?
yeah.
Oh gosh, you know what? That one just went right over my head. I'm so sorry. Mr. Giacchio, you want to repeat that again? The
I
timing?
said timing was right, but boom.
Okay.
Trying to bring levity to the meeting. It's okay.
Okay. We get 1.5 points. And so folks, can we put that on for next Tuesday for approval with a resolution? General consist. Okay, great. The Police Benevolent Association that represents the part of it that represents officers in Sleepy Hollow has put in a request to use Sykes Park for Saturday, August 21st for a community day event, the promising games and barbecue and music and so on. They need it for the day, both for setup and then cleanup, and then a rain date of August 28th. And they need our approval in order to do that. And I would enthusiastically support this proposal. I think we need to, I think it's great that they're doing this, they're reaching out to do it. I know they've done it, I believe they've done it in the past, it's been a while. And I think in the current kind of national environment, local environment, it's a really, anytime we can get folks together and police officers together in an event like this is helpful at the very least. So I would recommend to the board that we approve this. Discussion?
Sounds good to me.
I like that,
Yeah,
Denise.
I second this.
Sounds good to me.
Likewise.
All right, so let's put this on for next week, for Tuesday for approval. And we'll move on to our final agenda item. Thank you, Metro North, for emphasizing that.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah. No, I got it too, Denise.
I forgot to mute when it was coming.
Yeah, me too. Well, anyway, we have an EMS agreement. Mr. Giacchio, you want to walk us through that one too, please?
Yes, this is our annual agreement with Ovac, Ossining Volunteer Ambulance Corps. They provide our EMTs. This was discussed during the budget process. The ambulance corps has put it in their budget. We just need to approve the agreement so that we could pay them moving forward.
All right, everybody up for that? Great, we'll put it on for next week, okay? That concludes our work session agenda. I have a personnel matter that I need to discuss with the board, and I would ask for a motion to go in executive session. And that executive session would be via a separate Zoom call if it is approved to go into executive session, but can I get a motion?
Yeah, so moved. Seconded.
I think it was Trustee Gebler moved and seconded by Trustee Andrus. All in favor say aye or indicate
Aye.
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 Opposed or abstentions? Looks like 6-0. Okay. We are in executive session. We will be leaving this Zoom call. Thank you for anybody who participated along with us tonight, and I'll see you all on the other side of the curtain.